Hello, and welcome to Anatomy Physiology Lesson 4.04, Layers of the Epidermis. And what we're going to talk about in this video is the different regions of the epidermis. So we say layers of the epidermis, and that can be a little bit confusing because maybe you're saying, wait, I thought the epidermis was a layer. Well, it turns out we have cells in regions in the epidermis doing different things at different points. And so we have the first region would be here. And you'll notice these cells look very different from these cells, from these cells, from these cells. And this particular region has a certain number of layers of cells on average. We've got another, and I'm going to skip, I'm going to do a number 3 here because we have a layer of cells that's not represented. This is a pictograph representation of tissue for the epidermis. If you look, then we've got these real blocky square ones at the bottom. So this is another layer. This is 4. And then this bottom layer here is layer 5. And again, layer 2 is not present on this diagram. So we will call this 1, 3, whoops. Let me grab my white out. That should be the 2. 2, 3, 4, and 5. And we call these regions stratum. Strata just means layer. But we have to be careful because we've got a lot of different terms going on here. So we talk about the whole thing being the epidermis being a layer. We talk about the stratum being layers, but then we also talk about the number of cell layers. So for example, this lower level, and what we have going on here then is, this is the dermis, the layer below the epidermis. So this entire structure is the epidermis. The dermis is below. So for example, this bottom layer, layer number 5, which is called stratum basal, is 1 cell layer thick. The top, the stratum corneum, is 15 to 30 cell layers thick. So if you add all the layers up, we have, this is the way we're going to divide it. The entire thing is considered to be a layer. So we have the epidermis. We have 5 sublayers from the corneum. Let's fill these in now. The second one is called the stratum lucidum, Lucidum. The third one is the stratum granulosum, Granulosum, and the fourth one is called the stratum spinosum. Altogether, the entire epidermis is 30 to 50 cell layers. So again, we've got all kinds of, we're throwing that word layers around an awful lot, but hopefully that gives you a kind of an understanding of how we're breaking this down and how we're talking about it. Let's talk about these kind of in general, excuse me. So if we start at the bottom, we have the stratum basal. We generate new cells at this layer. And I'm going to put a little letter A. So what you see there is a specialty cell in that bottom layer that's undergoing mitosis. This is where we're producing the cells that make up the epidermis, most of them. So if you notice, all of these cells, even though they look different, are all the same. They're called keratinocytes. So if I point to this, and this, and this, and I'll put a letter B here. B, this is mitosis, and we are forming keratin, whoops, darn it. Let me slide my paper here a little bit. I realized I'm writing off screen. I do apologize. Okay, I'll let you catch up what you're writing, and I'll retape. All right, so these all have this, they're actually all the same kind of cell. They're called a keratinocyte. So from our med terms, we know that cyte means cell. Keratin is a tough protein, and almost all of the epidermis is made of this protein called keratin. Keratin is what makes up the hair, it's what makes up our fingernails, and so it is tough, it's waterproof, and we produce the keratinocytes here, and then what happens is as new cells are produced, it pushes the remaining cells up. As the cells rise, they start to change, and we see those changes in each of the layers. So in the stratum basal, we're generating these new keratinocytes, and we're going to talk about some of these other structures later. We're going to come back and pick those up. So the keratinocytes in my diagram have this peach color. I'm going to draw a dotted line, and this is the stratum basal. So it's the first layer of cells that exists adjacent to the dermis. We then go to the stratum spinosum. And this is going to be 3 to 5 cell layers thick. So as the keratinocytes are produced, they push up, and you can count, if we count, we've got 1 layer, 2 layer, 3 layers. So this has got 4 layers. There's really tight attachments between here. I'm not going to note that out or test you on it, but those are called desmosomes, and it helps the layer kind of hold together. We have, this is called, again, not going to test you on this, but in case you're wondering, it's called a dendritic cell, and it's able to move between the keratinocytes and help destroy invaders, bacteria, viruses that can get through. So what happens is we start to produce more keratin. So we're producing more keratin. And the nucleus begins to diminish, not too much in this layer. So we don't see a nucleus changing very much. But if we started off here, so we're moving up and you can see the cells enlarged a bit, we have more keratin. Then we get to stratum granulosum, and this is also 2 to 3 cell layers thick. And the term granulosum comes from the fact that this layer looks grainy. And if you look at what's happening, we see these cells beginning to flatten out. And if you think the nuclei from here to here look smaller, it's not your eyes deceiving you. The nuclei begin to disappear. The nuclei begin to disappear, and the cells begin to flatten. And we're going to rewrite the name of this tissue type, stratified squamous, keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. But squamous means flat, scale-like. And so they start to take on this very flat, scale-like appearance. The stratum lucidum isn't shown on this because it's only present in 2 areas of the body. We have the stratum lucidum on the soles of the feet and the palms of the hand. So if you look at a slide and it says thick skin, it will have the stratum lucidum on it. This layer, it's called lucidum. Lucid means clear. And if you look at this, and you will look at this when you sketch out epidermal tissue, it looks almost just translucent. It's clear. And that would be found in between. If it was present, it would be found. It would be found between the corneum and the granulosum. Yes, you do need to know the names of these for the test. Finally, we have the stratum corneum. And up here, this is a cell. This is a cell. This is a cell. These cells are nothing more than basically big pieces of keratin. They're completely dead. And they are 100% keratin. And we have lots of these layers. We said we have 15 to 30 of these layers. So it makes a really, really thick, tough, waterproof. It's why you can scratch the top of your skin and it doesn't hurt. So very effective for what it needs to do. So not only are we raising as we go, we're also dying as we go. Without a nucleus, you can't be, a cell can't live long. Your red blood cells do the same thing. They don't have a nucleus, and so they don't have a very long lifespan. Let me slide my paper once more, and we'll write the name of this tissue. So this tissue, we call the tissue that makes up the epidermis keratinized, stratified, keratinized, stratified, squamous epithelium, or epithelial tissue. Again, keratinized is because it's made of keratin. Stratified is it exists in layers. Squamous refers to this flat shape. And epithelium is any tissue that covers something. All right, now that we know a little bit about what's happening as the cells move up through the epidermis and how the keratin changes, let's talk about some of these specialty cells in the bottom and how that relates to skin color. So I'm going to bring this sheet all the way down. Take my paper down. All right, I'm going to go with a brown color since my, well, let's start off with green. So on my diagram, you have this green cell, and there's this odd shape underneath it. And this entire structure, both this and this, is called a Merkel cell, Merkel-cell. And it's a sensory. It's a nerve. It's a sensory neuron. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word. Sensory neuron. So a sensory neuron, it allows us to detect, like the other ones have, the Meissner's corpuscle and the Pacinian corpuscle, it allows us to sense pressure or touch. Specifically deep pressure. And I'm going to go to brown for my other. All right, I had to go on a marker hunt. Someone walked away with my brown marker, and that was going to drive me crazy. So I'm back. I had to pause the video. So these structures here and here on my diagram are brown. You may want to color code yours, but these are called melanocytes. And they are cells that produce pigment. In humans, we have a couple of different kinds of pigment. We have a pigment called melanin that is brown or black. There's different kinds of melanin, actually. I'm actually talking about eumelanin, but we're not going to get into those specifics. We have a pigment called carotene. It's more of an orange red, O-R-A-N, orange, or I'm sorry, orange yellow. It's actually more orange, but O-R-A-N-G-E, although I couldn't spell orange. And what happens is these melanocytes produce their pigments, and they send it, or they put it into little vesicles called melanosomes. So for skin color, what happens is, as these guys make their pigment, they send it up into the cells above in these melanosomes. And I'm just going to draw in some melanosomes. I'm going to make them brown. And the melanosomes stay inside of the cells and get carried up through the layers. So we have, let's switch back to black. We have pigment from the melanocytes is sent out in melanosomes. The darker your skin, this skin darkness is not tied to how many melanocytes you have. By the way, let's get the translation for that. Melano is black, cyte is cell, black cell. So your skin color is not associated with how many melanocytes you have, but rather how many melanosomes you have. So darker skin, your melanocytes are working harder, they're producing more melanosomes. The color is proportional to the amount of melanosomes. And if you're Caucasian especially, it's more pronounced if you're Caucasian. But what happens if you get a bad sunburn? Your melanocytes sense that there's trouble, that UV light can be damaging to the DNA in these cells. And sometimes damage occurs, and that results in skin, or can result in skin cancer. We're going to do a whole separate recording on skin cancer. But what will happen is it'll stimulate these melanocytes to produce more melanin and put it into melanosomes and send it up. And you'll see the skin color darken. We talk about a burn fading into a tan. Actually, what happens is there's a delayed reaction between when we have a sunburn and between when our melanocytes can start to kick up enough melanin into melanosomes to start sending it up through our skin that we see it. So that's what happens when we tan. I wanted to talk about a couple of disorders in skin color, and one is called, let's go with red. They both actually work the same way, but the first one is called albinism. And if you guys remember, albino is the translation for that is white, ism is condition. We may not have had these terms yet this year in 2020 because we skipped a couple chapters, and so our midterms might be off. But if you have the condition albinism, your melanocytes don't produce pigment. And I should say all of your melanocytes don't produce pigment. And so you're very, very vulnerable. People who have albinism, they look completely white. They don't have any color anywhere, not in their hair, not in their eyelashes. And in times long gone, people would think they were cursed because they look so different. If you have part of your melanocytes that work and part that don't, you can have a condition called vitiligo. So with vitiligo, you have melanocytes quit producing pigment in areas. It's splotchy. Melanocytes stop producing pigment in just areas only. So this is most pronounced in people who are African American. And this is what Michael Jackson said that he suffered from. And so what the result is, if you don't have melanocytes operating in certain areas of your skin, then you'll have areas that look pure white against areas that are very dark. That's why it's more pronounced in people who are African American. Now, can Caucasian people have it? Yes. Can Hispanic people have it? Yes. But if you're African American, it's really, really stark. So Michael Jackson's account was he had vitiligo, and so he would do a skin bleaching treatment. So all of his skin was the same tone. But if we look, I'm going to pause the video and pull up a picture of albino and a picture of albinism so that we can get an idea of what that looks like. All right, let me share my screen with you. So here is an example of vitiligo. You can see that this is a brown-skinned African American, and it's very common for it to develop in the eyes and in the mouth region. And some people will choose to use cosmetics to cover this up. Some people said, were saying, this is the way I look and I'm going to embrace it. And this is why Michael Jackson chose to do the skin bleaching regimen. Here's an image of someone who's albino. This looks like an Asian, someone of Asian descent based on the eye folds. But usually where they have black hair, we've got that stark white hair. You can see even the eyelashes in the skin. Those are two of our disorders that deal with skin pigmentation. And that takes us through. So our takeaways here, we have the 5 layers. You need to know the names of them. You need to know where they are, be able to label them on a diagram. We talked about the special layers in the basal layer, which basal and basement, that both mean bottom. We've got the Merkel cells, we've got melanocytes, and finally we went through skin pigmentation. Why does it occur and what happens when things go awry with that? All right, thanks for watching and have a good day.